An independent review has found that Ofsted was defensive and complacent in its response to the death of head teacher Ruth Perry. She died by suicide after learning that an inspection was downgrading her school. Ofsted's chief inspector has accepted most of the review's recommendations, as our education editor Bronwyn Jeffries now reports.
Ruth Perry had a happy family life, a job she loved. Last year, the primary head teacher took her own life. An Ofsted inspection, an inadequate grade, shattered her mental health. But Ofsted was defensive and complacent, says this report. The Education Secretary says it shows the need for change.
It's deeply concerning, and it underlines the view that I've held for some time about the need for wider reform of Ofsted. The measures that I've set out in terms of moving away from those one-word judgments are only the first step in terms of the change that we need to see. And I'm determined to work with the new Chief Inspector to drive forward that change and to have a culture that encourages openness and transparency.
Ruth's sister, Julia, has campaigned for that change. In the months after the death, Ofsted made no attempt to contact the family.
It's a complacent, defensive organisation that has been incapable of self-reflection, that will not listen to criticism, and has been doing untold harm as a result and getting away with it.
Do you think that the inspection came to the right conclusion?
I do. I think the findings were secure, and I think the inspection team worked with the professionalism and sensitivity that I would expect from our inspectors.
Ofsted's boss at the time was Amanda Spielman. She defended their approach. The BBC has asked her for an interview about this report or any response to its many criticisms of Ofsted leadership at the time. She has refused both requests. Ofsted now has a new boss. He says he wants change, and head teachers say he's taken the first steps.
Since the new leadership has taken over the reins at Ofsted, we've seen a real sea change in their openness and their willingness to take on change. And we're looking forward to working with Sir Martyn to make sure that we can co-construct the future.
This week, Julia welcomed the scrapping of one- or two-word judgments, the first step to a different system. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News.
Now, an independent review has found that Ofsted was defensive and complacent in its response to the death of head teacher Ruth Perry. You remember she died by suicide after learning that the watchdog was downgrading her school.
Ofsted's chief inspector has accepted most of the review's recommendations, as our education editor Bronwyn Jeffries now reports.
Ruth Perry had a happy family life, a job she loved. Last year, the primary head teacher took her own life. An Ofsted inspection, an inadequate grade, shattered her mental health. But Ofsted was defensive and complacent, says this report. The Education Secretary says it shows the need for change.
It's deeply concerning, and it underlines the view that I've held for some time about the need for wider reform of Ofsted. The measures that I've set out in terms of moving away from those one-word judgments are only the first step in terms of the change that we need to see. And I'm determined to work with the new Chief Inspector to drive forward that change and to have a culture that encourages openness and transparency.
Ruth's sister, Julia, has campaigned for that change. In the months after the death, Ofsted made no attempt to contact the family.
It's a complacent, defensive organisation that has been incapable of self-reflection, that will not listen to criticism, and has been doing untold harm as a result and getting away with it.
Do you think that the inspection came to the right conclusion?
I do. I think the findings were secure, and I think the inspection team worked with the professionalism and sensitivity that I would expect from our inspectors.
Ofsted's boss at the time was Amanda Spielman. She defended their approach. The BBC has asked her for an interview about this report or any response to its many criticisms of Ofsted leadership at the time. She has refused both requests. Ofsted now has a new boss. He says he wants change, and head teachers say he's taken the first steps.
Since the new leadership has taken over the reins at Ofsted, we've seen a real sea change in their openness and their willingness to take on change. And we're looking forward to working with Sir Martyn to make sure that we can co-construct the future.
This week, Julia welcomed the scrapping of 1- or 2-word judgments, the first step to a different system. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News.
And we will be talking to Ruth Perry's sister, Julia Waters, in a short while here on the programme. But we're joined now by Sir Martyn Oliver, Chief Inspector at Ofsted. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for coming in. Just first of all, your reaction to this report.
Well, I'm really pleased. I'm very proud to have commissioned it. And although there were hard things there for us to hear, I did that on purpose so that we could actually accept the criticism and then build a better future. I want to reset our relationship, focus on the positives now and build a system which maintains, indeed raises standards for parents, but is reducing the pressure for the hard-working teachers and staff out there.
Ruth Perry's sister, Julia, who Sally just mentioned, says this review shows there was evidence of a completely dysfunctional organisation. Would you agree that that's what Ofsted was, at least?
Well, they were fantastic people. I mean, I've been working in education for nearly 30 years, and I'm finding fantastic people in Ofsted when I arrived in January. And I'm really proud to work with them. And so when I commissioned that report, that description, I recognise and have fully accepted the report and I accepted the coroner's request into the tragic death of Ruth Perry. And indeed, all the meetings I've had with Professor Waters talking about how can we build a better future. And I'm now really focused on delivering an exciting new future for parents and children that works better with the professions out there.
But it sounds to me like you're not accepting that it was completely dysfunctional, her words.
Well, I can't comment on something that's there before my time. I can accept the report that was written, and I've accepted the report. I commissioned that report along with the chair of my board.
You must know what it was like before your time, though.
Well, as a head teacher who nearly had 100 inspections, I went into this job thinking there can be a difference that can be made. And I'm now really focused on making that difference. And I'm delighted that yesterday, for example, that the Secretary of State announced the removal of the single word grade. And now with the changes that I've announced today and the work that we're going to do together with the Trade Union General Secretaries, you just heard from Pepe on the line a few moments ago. So people like him, we can build a much better future.
So changing the way schools are inspected in England, getting rid of those one words, outstanding, inadequate, that kind of thing. I think a lot of our viewers, parents are thinking, OK, so what's it going to change to? What will I notice at my kid's school instead?
OK, so just for the next 12 months, we still have sub-judgments. So we still talk about the quality of education, behaviour and attitudes, personal development and the quality of leadership and management. And those 4 areas will still have the judgment because the old framework, the current framework, will exist. It's just the overall effectiveness, that one word or 2 words at the end that summarises it all. And then going forward, right now, the Secretary of State's announced a new report card. So we'll now work hard with the Secretary of State to produce that report card for September 25, and that will give parents far more nuanced information, far better information. It will still hold schools to account because they get a lot of money from taxpayers and they need, children only get one chance at childhood and they need to do the best job, but Ofsted can do that in a way which reduces pressure. And really importantly, we can focus on the most vulnerable children out there. I truly believe if you get it right for the most vulnerable children, you get it right for everyone.
How are you going to, in this process, work on gaining back the trust of many teachers who are disillusioned by what they've seen from Ofsted over the years?
Well, that was the big listen. That was the big listen. I mean, open and transparent, non-defensive, accepting the criticism. We took out a significant survey. Not only did we do the survey, the largest in Ofsted's history, and it's really unusual for a government department to do that on itself, but then I got 2 independent bodies who spoke to over 4,000 parents, over 4,000 staff. Fantastic that we heard from over 4,000 children. We've published every one of those reports. And then, of course, on top of that, we also had Dame Christine Gilbert's independent review into the issues that the coroner found. And I've released all of that today. Nothing's hidden, and we build a better future together.
So that's the survey, but what are you going to do?
So that lists about, it's more than a few hundred actions in there. So one way of reducing pressure, we will announce right now that all of our graded inspections will be announced on a Mondays. So head teachers will know on a Monday if we're going to turn up on a Tuesday and Wednesday. I can remember my head teachers saying that they'd have their suits in their car, they wouldn't know when the call was going to come. They couldn't go out on a conference or a trip with children to a visit because you never know when Ofsted call's going to come down the line. But I can take that away by saying, well, we'll tell you. By Monday afternoon, you'll know if that's the week that we're going to come. And the other important part behind that is that by Friday, because on a Monday we notify the school, Tuesday, Wednesday we inspect, Thursday we write the report up, and then Friday, another massive announcement in here is creating something called the Ofsted Academy, where we can do all of the training, all of the consistency, and that can happen on the Friday because those inspectors can develop and be quite professional and focus on their consistency, which is another big criticism that we've heard.
OK, so you're saying that there won't be the kind of surprise arrivals of the inspectors that some schools have complained about, but if you're only warning them on a Monday that they're going to be inspected that week, and they might turn up on a Tuesday morning, that's not much warning, is it?
Interestingly, when you talk to parents and to children, and I spoke to great numbers of children, not just in the survey, but going out to visit them. So I went into youth offending institutions. I mean, many of your viewers will think that Ofsted just inspects schools. There are 22,000 of those in England, but it's about 92,000 providers that we inspect and regulate. So early years, childminders, youth offending institutions, education settings, secure children's homes, local authorities and so on. And when you speak to the vast majority of the parents and the children themselves, do you know what they say? They want no notice inspections. They want us to turn up unannounced. They want us to see what it's like without the school even knowing or the setting even knowing. But that's unreasonable.
Or undercover pupils.
Well, I think one of the things that is really heartening, if you read the children's survey, the children say that they want Ofsted to check how happy, healthy, safe and their well-being. And then really nicely, the pupils say they also want to know how well the provider's doing for children with special educational needs. That was greatly heartening to hear that.
How are you going to make sure that these sort of comprehensive inspection reports that come out now, not just one word, not just one headline, make sense to those of us who are not involved in education, so that mums and dads understand it's not just full of jargon and technicalities, that it's written for us as parents and as families, not for the teachers necessarily themselves?
Yeah, so the reports have always been written with a plain English and a sense of clarity in the way that they've been written. In fact, it's been criticised that we've actually dumbed them down to a level that's not really giving a lot of information. And that's why I think a new style report, building on the best, because there are elements of this framework which are the best. We've heard this in the report. Some of the best parts of this framework are the best there have ever been. We don't want to change for change's sake. We want to make sure that we're respectful for the workload of people out there. But we can make a better framework. We can give more information to parents, and we can, really importantly, reduce that pressure out there to the hard-working people in schools and colleges and early years providers everywhere.
OK, so Martyn Oliver from Ofsted. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Good chat. Now, as we've been hearing this morning, a review has found that Ofsted were defensive and complacent in the way they responded to the death of Ruth Perry, who died by suicide following an inspection at her school.
The government is scrapping one-word ratings for schools, something her family have campaigned for. We are joined live on the programme now by Ruth's sister, Professor Julia Waters. Morning to you, Julia. Thank you so much for talking to us today. So that's a really fairly specific quote there, isn't it, about Ofsted's attitude in going into this report. Just your response to what you've heard so far today.
Well, Christine Gilbert's report is absolutely damning of an organisation that's dysfunctional, chaotic, was poorly led, fails in its basic duties towards its own staff, has a complete lack of communication internally as well as externally. I mean, clearly my family have been on the receiving end of that defensive and complacent culture for many, many months, and that was incredibly hurtful. But to see now what its root causes are within the organisation does not fill me with confidence that reform of Ofsted's going to be easy or quick.
And could you share with us, if you don't mind, how that defensiveness impacted on you and your family?
We weren't contacted by Ofsted at all in the first 4 months after Ruth's death, and only contacted indirectly after Amanda Spielman had gone on national television defending that inspection. And that defence of an inspection continued all the way through until the inquest. And I gather from Christine Gilbert's report that members of staff in Ofsted, Ofsted staff, the members of the board of Ofsted that are meant to hold Ofsted to account, only became aware of Ruth's death through the media when I chose to speak out. And their kind of total lack of any empathy towards my family, their unwillingness to learn any lessons from what had happened, their unquestioning defence of that inspection, their inspector, their inspection system, was not only really personally hurtful to my family in the worst moments of our grief, but actually struck me as utterly irresponsible if this organisation that's meant to uphold standards and hold schools to account was absolutely refusing to be held accountable and to ask any hard questions of itself.
This report recognises officially that Ofsted should have come and spoken to your family sooner than they did. Does that give you any comfort at all that that has at least been recognised?
Well, it is, yes, it's an acknowledgement that our experiences of Ofsted's inadequate response to our family were well founded. You know, we weren't imagining that it was outrageous that a public body refused to engage with a family who were raising legitimate concerns of widespread importance. So I'm glad that Christine Gilbert felt able to go beyond the very limited terms of reference that she was set for her review to reveal, frankly, a dysfunctional institutional culture and a long-standing lack of proper leadership and management in Ofsted. Martyn Oliver has a massive, possibly impossible task ahead of him to put that culture right.
Given what you've just said, that task is almost impossible, what at this point do you think could be done? What is achievable?
Martyn Oliver has said repeatedly, he said in his response to the coroner's recommendations, he said in his response to the Big Listen that he's committed to transparency and openness. And yet the responses of Ofsted to recommendations precisely about that, about allowing external scrutiny of their processes, having independent members on complaints board, for instance, refreshing the senior leadership team with new blood. He's resistant to all of those things. For me, the only way that Ofsted can rebuild trust in the sector and in the public is by opening itself up, by showing that it means it, opening itself up to scrutiny and to accountability, the kind of accountability it expects of the schools and institutions it inspects.
So we know, don't we, that Ofsted has announced that it's scrapping the 1 or 2 word inspection grades. Is that enough?
Well, it's the Department for Education that makes that decision, and I'm absolutely heartened to hear that the Department for Education has made that long overdue decision. But no, it's not enough. It's a significant first step, but as Martyn Oliver himself recognises and as Bridget Phillipson has promised, there's a need for much greater reform. Christine Gilbert says in her report that in order to rebuild trust, there needs to be radical change. I have been saying this for over 18 months now. Radical change. The changes that Martyn Oliver is suggesting, some of them very good and sensible changes, but they still do not really address the central problem of Ofsted's defensive and complacent institutional culture.
We've mentioned trust a couple of times. I'm interested to know what you think Ofsted need to do to get teachers to trust them.
They need to engage properly with teachers. I welcome some of the responses to the Big Listen survey, whatever the flaws of the survey in its conception. Ofsted have now received some really hard-hitting and critical messages from teachers and head teachers about what's going wrong with Ofsted. Now they need to engage with the profession. They need to continue to speak to teachers and head teachers and their representative bodies in sorting out the solutions to those problems, and not retreat behind their barriers of independence to make up their own minds about how best to address the multitude of problems that have been identified. They need to engage properly with the profession, to listen and to act.
Professor Julia Waters, thank you so much for talking to us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.